The room went silent as the lawyer read out the will. Not the respectful, heavy kind of silence people hold in moments of grief, but the sharp, hungry kind that comes when everyone is waiting to hear what they're getting. My siblings leaned forward in their seats like children on Christmas morning, the kind who shake the presents before opening them. Their anticipation filled the room so thickly that I could feel it pressing against my skin. My sister, Elaine, already had her hand half raised, ready to gleefully cover her mouth in fake surprise. My older brother, Mark, rested his clasped hands on the polished table, pretending to be solemn but tapping his foot under the chair in excitement. I sat still, arms crossed, watching the lawyer shuffle papers with more drama than necessary. I wasn't worried. Dad and I had been close, at least closer than the others. Sunday breakfasts, long phone calls, his just checking in texts. He always made me feel like he saw me, even when others didn't. So when the lawyer finally began reading, I relaxed. My beachfront villa in St. Ives, he announced, goes to my daughter, Elaine. Elaine gasped loudly, theatrically, as though she hadn't been the one to spend every summer of her adult life vacationing there for free. She clapped a hand to her chest and whispered, "Oh, Daddy," in the same tone she used for Instagram captions. My investment stocks and brokerage accounts go to my eldest son, Mark. Mark nodded once, sharply, like a general accepting a medal. He didn't even try to look emotional. Money was the only language he respected, and he had just been handed a dictionary. And the properties in London, the lawyer continued, shall be divided between Elaine and Mark, as previously discussed. They exchanged a triumphant glance. A look that said, we always knew we were the favorites. I tried to tell myself that Dad had saved something meaningful for me. Something personal, something thoughtful. I wasn't expecting millions. I just wanted a sign that I mattered in a way money couldn't measure. But then the lawyer hesitated. He folded the paper, cleared his throat, and adjusted his glasses in a nervous little gesture that made my skin prickle. He looked at me, then back at the paper, and to my youngest child. Another pause, one that lasted too long. The room tightened around me. I leave nothing. Nothing. The word dropped into the air like a stone, sinking straight into my stomach. I felt the shock crack through me in cold flashes. First disbelief, then humiliation, then something I didn't want to name yet. Mark didn't even bother to hide his grin. Elaine leaned back in her leather chair, smirk pulling at the corner of her mouth, her eyes sparkling with the satisfaction of a score finally settled. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. My throat burned. Anger, confusion, betrayal, all tangled so tightly that I couldn't breathe for a moment. Nothing. Not even a letter? Not a memory, not a memento, not a single object from the man who taught me how to ride a bike and how to stand up for myself, who once told me that out of all his children, I was the one with the kindest heart. My hands trembled under the table. I hid them in my lap. The lawyer finished reading the rest of the document, but the words blurred, meaningless. I saw his lips move, but his voice echoed as though I were underwater. The whole world tilted slightly, the polished floor shining too brightly, the chandelier too sharp. My ears buzzed. My eyes stung, not with tears, but with the kind of quiet rage that grows in the chest like wildfire. How could Dad do this to me? The session ended with handshakes and smiles, none of them mine. My siblings stood, stretching their arms smugly. Elaine immediately began discussing renovations she'd been dying to make. Mark was already on his phone, firing off messages, probably to his financial advisor. And there I sat, frozen in my chair like a forgotten piece of furniture. My chair. The one Dad always told me to sit in because the sunlight hit it just right in the mornings. The one I had claimed since I was 10. Now I felt like a stranger occupying someone else's seat. Eventually, the others drifted out of the room, their laughter echoing down the hallway. As the heavy door closed behind them, the silence that remained felt completely different, empty and suffocating. I stared at the will on the table, the letters swimming before my eyes. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there, trying to stitch together a version of reality that made sense. But every possible explanation unraveled in my hands. Was I mistaken about our relationship? Had everything I believed been a lie? Or had something happened? Something I didn't know? I didn't even notice the lawyer approaching until I felt a light touch on my arm. I looked up, startled. His eyes were soft but tense, like someone holding a secret too heavy for one person. "Stay," he whispered. "Just one word." quiet but urgent. My heart thudded. Why? What more could there possibly be? He glanced at the closed door, then back at me, lowering his voice even further. There's something I need to show you, he said. Something your father asked me to give you privately. A flicker of something, hope? Fear, flashed through me. My breath caught in my throat. Suddenly, the will didn't feel like the end of something. It felt like the beginning. When the room emptied, the lawyer locked the door. The loud click of the bolt sliding into place made me sit up straighter. Moments ago, the space had been full of murmurs, shuffling papers, the rustle of expensive coats. Now it felt like all the air had been vacuumed out. The sudden stillness pressed in on me, and for the first time since the will was read, the lawyer looked like a man carrying a burden rather than a professional delivering disappointing news. He walked slowly across the room, his polished shoes tapping softly against the hardwood floor. The blinds were half drawn, and the late afternoon light crept in through the slits, striping his face with alternating lines of brightness and shadow. He paused at the edge of the table and drew in a long, steady breath, as if preparing himself for something he had rehearsed but wished he didn't have to say. Then, without a word, he reached into his leather briefcase. His hand disappeared inside for longer than seemed necessary. When it emerged, he was holding a small black envelope, matte, slim, and unsettlingly plain. He set it down on the table in front of me, sliding it forward with a single finger. This, he said quietly, his voice dropping to a tone that felt almost secretive, was given to me by your father. He instructed me to hand it to you only after the official reading. A strange current ran through me, something between dread and hope. My heart pounded so loudly it felt like it had climbed up into my throat. For a moment, I just stared at the envelope. It didn't look like much, yet something about it felt heavier than its size. Final, intentional, dangerous, even. My fingers hovered above it before I forced them down. The paper was cool, too cool, and smooth beneath my touch. No name, no address, no handwriting. Just a wax seal pressed into the flap, though even the seal was blank. No emblem, no initials, just an irregular oval of hardened wax with the faintest hint of a fingerprint sitting crookedly on its surface. It looked rushed, or maybe made in a moment of fear. I felt the lawyer watching me closely, and when I met his eyes, he gave a small nod, granting permission or absolving himself. Taking a slow breath, I slipped a finger under the edge of the seal and lifted. The wax cracked softly, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Inside was a thick card, the type of cardstock people use for expensive invitations or confidential notices. My pulse hammered as I slid it out. There were only 3 words handwritten across the center in bold, dark ink. Trust no one. The letters were sharp and deliberate, as if each stroke had been pressed with intention. My lungs tightened. A small rush of air escaped me, half gasp, half disbelief. My father, the man who used to tell me that trust was the foundation of everything, had written this? And written it for me, secretly, knowing it would only reach me after his death? The lawyer said nothing. He simply waited, the tension in his posture betraying how heavily he knew this moment would fall. With trembling hands, I flipped the card over, and only then did a metallic sound rustle inside the envelope. Something slid out and clinked onto the table, a key. It was small, but not like a house key or a diary key. It was old, iron or steel, with an intricate pattern carved into the bow. The metal was frigid, as if it had been sitting in ice rather than a lawyer's briefcase. When I picked it up, the coldness bit into my fingertips so sharply that I shuddered. What is this for? I whispered. I don't know. The lawyer replied softly, and something in his tone made me believe him. Your father didn't say, only that you would understand what to do. I don't, I said, shaking my head. I have no idea. You will, he answered, and though he tried to sound reassuring, the problem was that he looked even more uneasy than I felt. The weight of the key settled into my palm, far heavier than its size should have allowed. I turned it over slowly, studying the grooves, the tiny notches. It felt ancient, like it belonged to a different era or a different life. My father had never shown me anything like it before. He wasn't a collector of antiques. He didn't keep safes or secret compartments. At least, not that I ever knew of. Why would he leave everything to my siblings, the properties, the accounts, the investments, yet leave this for me? A mysterious card, a warning written in his own hand. and a key that felt like it was forged for a purpose I had yet to discover. A chill crept down my spine, the kind that doesn't come from cold air, but from the sudden realization that things are not what they seemed. The will I thought was a brutal oversight now felt like a deliberate diversion. A smokescreen. A misdirection. What aren't you telling me? I asked the lawyer, my voice quieter than before. He swallowed, a subtle but noticeable motion. Your father, he said slowly, was a complicated man. More complicated than you know. What does that mean? It means, he murmured, leaning forward just a fraction, that what you've been left with may not be what it appears. And it may not be safe. My fingers tightened around the key. Safe from who? He hesitated, his eyes flicking to the door as if he feared someone might be listening from the hallway. He didn't say, the lawyer whispered, only that you must be careful, and that you must not, under any circumstances, show that card to anyone, not even your siblings. The words hit me like a blow. I pressed the key into my palm until I could feel the ridges biting into my skin. My father wasn't impulsive. He wasn't dramatic. If he left a warning and a key, it meant something real, something serious, something he feared would reach me too late unless he hid it behind a wall of silence and legal formality. What do I do now? I asked. The lawyer backed away a step, as though putting distance between himself and whatever he had just delivered into my hands. I wish I could tell you, he said quietly. But this is yours alone. I closed my fingers around the cold metal, feeling its weight pull on me like gravity. For the first time since my father's death, I realized I hadn't been left out. I had been chosen. The number on the back of the card led me to an old, nearly abandoned storage facility outside town. The kind of place people forget about until they suddenly remember they left something there 20 years ago. The gravel on the ground crunched loudly under my tires as I pulled in, and the wind whistled through broken chain-link fencing, carrying with it the faint smell of rust and sun-baked metal. Rows of storage units stretched out like a maze, faded paint peeling from their doors, numbers barely visible. The place felt deserted, yet watched, the way empty spaces sometimes feel when you're walking through them alone. Unit 47 was located at the far end, surrounded by units with locks so corroded they looked like they'd give way if you breathed on them too hard. But not this one. The padlock on mine was new, heavy, solid, untouched by weather. As if someone had been here recently just to make sure it stayed secured. The sight of it made my pulse jump. I stepped out of my car, key clenched in my fist, and approached the door. A chill ran down my spine despite the dry heat of the afternoon. My father had sent me here. Or at least, he had planned for me to come here long before he died. That thought alone made my skin prickle. The lock clicked open with a smoothness that startled me. No resistance. No stiffness. As if it had been waiting for this exact key. I pulled the rolling door upward, and the metal screeched in protest, shuddering along the track. The stale air inside spilled out, thick with dust, oil, and something sharper, like the remnants of machinery long since powered down. The interior was dim, but I could make out one thing clearly. The unit wasn't filled with boxes or furniture or forgotten junk like the others. There was only a single object inside. A military-grade metal locker. It stood alone in the center of the concrete floor, tall and imposing, its dark surface dented and scratched as though it had lived 1,000 lives before ending up here. Stamped across the front in worn, blocky letters were my father's initials. Seeing them there, stark against the steel, made my chest tighten. This locker wasn't just storage, it was intention. Another lock secured its front. Larger, older, much more serious. My hand shook slightly as I brought up the same key that had opened the unit. It slid into the lock as if the two had been crafted together. When it turned, I felt something shift inside me. As the door creaked open, an older, colder scent escaped the locker, a mixture of dust, aging paper, machine oil, and something that felt like memory wrapped in secrecy. The air seemed to thicken, and for a moment I just stood there, staring at the contents, unsure what to touch first. Inside were several objects, arranged with almost military precision. The first was a stack of folders, neatly tied with twine. Their labels were written in codes, sequences of numbers, letters, and symbols I didn't recognize. Some were stamped with red ink. Confidential, restricted, and one marked, "Do not duplicate." Others had no labels at all, and their edges were worn from use. Next to them lay a small, sleek burner phone. Black, unbranded, the kind sold in corner stores and used by people who didn't want to be found. The phone screen was dark, but the battery icon flickered faintly when I lifted it, as if it still held a charge. A strange tension rose in my throat at the thought of who might have called it last, or who it might still be connected to. Beside the phone was a leather journal. Old, the cover worn smooth, the edges rippled from moisture and time. It looked like something my father might have carried with him daily, something he kept close. A part of me ached at the thought that I was touching something he had once held with his own hands. I ran my thumb along the edge, afraid and desperate to open it at the same time. And then there was the photograph. It lay at the bottom of the locker, half tucked under the journal. I slid it out gently, brushing off the thin layer of dust. The picture was slightly faded, but clear enough to see my father standing between two men. All three wore dark jackets with an identical emblem stitched onto the sleeve. The emblem showed a circle enclosing a geometric symbol, sharp lines intersecting like some coded message. I had never seen it before, but the sight of it sent a coil of unease through me. The two men beside him looked hardened, serious. One tall, with a stern expression and a scar running along his jaw. The other shorter, stockier, with intense eyes that seemed to stare directly at whoever held the photo. My father, however, was younger in the picture, his face unmarked by the lines age had given him. But he wasn't smiling, not even a hint. His eyes were focused, alert, as though the moment captured wasn't meant to be a memory but evidence. I studied the emblem again. A symbol like that wasn't random. It meant something. And if my father was wearing it too, it meant he had been part of something he never told me about. Something big enough, secret enough, that he hid the only clues in a locked storage unit at the edge of town. Why hadn't he told me? Why bury this? Why leave it to be found only after his death? I glanced back at the folders, the journal, the phone. My father hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't abandoned me in his will. He had left me something far more dangerous, far more personal, something my siblings could never have handled. His secrets, his truths, his unfinished business. I slid the photograph into my pocket and swallowed hard. Whatever this locker contained, it wasn't an inheritance. It was a responsibility, a warning, a doorway into a world my father kept hidden. And now it was mine to walk through. I opened the journal. The leather creaked softly, as if even the book itself had been holding its breath for years. The pages were thick, yellowed at the edges, and smelled faintly of smoke and something metallic, almost like gunpowder. My hands trembled as I turned the cover back, expecting neat handwriting or maybe a dated entry at the top like his old work planners. But the first page wasn't written at all. It was carved, deep grooves slashing through the paper with such force the indentations showed on the next two pages. As if my father had written it not with a pen, but with desperation. If you are reading this, they know you exist. My stomach dropped so violently I had to grip the edge of the locker to steady myself. The words felt like a punch, sharp, breath-stealing, cold. My father had been a steady man, rational, careful. For him to carve a warning like that, something unimaginable must have been chasing him. I stared at the message, unable to move, hearing only the faint echo of my own heartbeat in the silent storage unit. Who were they? And why would my mere existence matter to anyone? Swallowing hard, I turned the page carefully, afraid the carved letters might somehow leap back and brand themselves onto me. The next pages were filled with writing, dense, urgent handwriting that grew sharper and more frantic the deeper I read. It was like watching my father unravel through ink. The entries told a story I never knew. A story my father had clearly spent years carrying alone. He had been part of an undercover intelligence unit, not the kind that made the news or got acknowledged in history books. This was something hidden beneath even the classified layers of government work. He referred to it only as Section 7, though the name was always followed by parentheses filled with numbers I didn't understand. Code names, mission identifiers. It was like reading a foreign language sprinkled among things that were shockingly real. He wrote about surveillance, about infiltrations, about people who didn't exist on any database because they were erased deliberately. He described a mission that changed everything, one involving a discovery he called the breach. He never explained what it was exactly, but the way he spoke around it made my skin crawl. He wrote that exposing the breach had painted a permanent target on his back. I began piecing together fragments. He hadn't left the unit on good terms. His team had been compromised. Someone high-ranking had been involved. Someone dangerous. The deeper I read, the more horrifying it became. I had always known my father as a quiet man. Steady. Predictable. I thought his caution was simply a personality trait. But now I realized it had been a shield. Behind it was a man constantly looking over his shoulder, calculating risks I never knew existed. And then, among the chaotic notes, drawings, and references to hidden contacts, I found something that made my chest tighten so painfully I had to stop reading for a moment. He wrote about me. Not once. Not casually. But dozens of times. He had circled my name in some entries, underlined it in others. One page had just 2 sentences. They asked about the child again. They cannot know who she is. My breath hitched. The child. Me. Further entries revealed the truth with devastating clarity. He had spent the rest of his life protecting me, not from poverty or poor choices or heartbreak, but from people who had been looking for me since before I could speak. I wasn't just his daughter. I was a loose thread in something massive, something he feared would unravel if anyone pulled too hard. He trusted no one else. Not my siblings. Not his colleagues. Not even my mother, whom he wrote about sorrowfully, apologetically. Only one person will understand, he wrote in an early entry. Only one person will see the truth for what it is. She is quiet, observant, cautious. She sees what others ignore. I didn't know whether to feel honored or terrified. As I kept reading, the ink grew darker in tone, the handwriting more jagged. He mentioned surveillance around the house, coded messages he intercepted, and conversations he overheard that made him uproot us more than once during my childhood. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. Near the end of the journal, the entries became short, fragmented, as if written in haste. Time is limited. They're moving faster. Contact compromised. She cannot trust anyone. They know she's grown. They know she's close. The last few sentences were written in a shaky hand, the pressure uneven, like he had been writing in the dark or while hiding. My throat tightened as I turned to the final page. There were no frantic paragraphs or rambling warnings, just 2 things. A set of coordinates written in precise, careful numbers. And beneath them, a final message, written in a thick stroke that had nearly torn the page. Do not show anyone, especially family. The word family was underlined 3 times. I sat back on the cold concrete floor, the journal resting in my lap, my legs weak beneath me. Outside, the wind rattled something metallic in the distance. The storage unit suddenly felt too small, too dark, too alive with the weight of secrets I wasn't prepared to carry. Everything I thought I knew about my father was wrong. Everything I thought I knew about my life was incomplete. And whatever waited at those coordinates was the key to a truth he died trying to keep safe. And now it was mine to uncover. The burner phone buzzed so violently in my hand it felt alive, as if it were trying to leap out of my grip. For a long second, I simply stared at it, an old, scuffed device with no apps, no wallpaper, not even a scratch that looked familiar. It wasn't mine. It wasn't supposed to ring. It shouldn't even have service, not in a storage unit, so old the walls were practically dissolving with rust. But it rang again, harder, echoing inside the metal locker like a pulse. I swallowed, feeling my heartbeat in my throat. The phone kept vibrating, demanding attention, demanding a choice. I didn't want to pick it up. I didn't want to know who could possibly be calling a phone that had been locked away for years, maybe longer. I thought about walking out, throwing the thing into the street, leaving the entire unit behind. But something in me, maybe the same part of me that kept my father's warnings repeating in my head, compelled me to stay. My hand trembled as I pressed the button. I lifted the phone to my ear and didn't breathe. For a moment, there was nothing. No static. No background noise. Just pure, suffocating silence. Then a voice seeped through. Deep, steady, and so controlled it sounded inhuman. We've been waiting for you. The words weren't spoken with surprise, or curiosity, or even malice. They were spoken like a fact, as if my arrival was an appointment they already had penciled in. A timeline I was always meant to follow. Before I could respond, ask who they were, or even exhale, the line cut. Not a click, not a fade, just instant, absolute disconnection. I lowered the phone slowly, letting the silence fill the storage unit again. The air felt colder. The metal locker seemed heavier. Even the shadows on the concrete floor looked different, stretched in a way that made the whole place feel watched. My father's journal was still open where I'd left it, the carved warning staring up at me like an accusation. If you are reading this, they know you exist. I hadn't fully believed it before. Now I did. The phone call wasn't a coincidence. They knew the unit had been opened. They knew someone had accessed the locker. They knew it was me. That meant they had eyes on this place. Cameras? A lookout. Someone parked outside. The thought sent a spike of fear through me, so sharp it almost took my breath away. I forced myself to move, to think. Panic would get me killed. Dad's entries made that clear enough. He had spent years outsmarting these people, hiding from them, documenting everything in codes I barely understood. He had left clues because he trusted only one person to follow them, me. And now, whoever they were, they knew exactly who had picked up the trail. I looked at the contents of the locker again. The folders thick with numbers and symbols. The photograph of Dad with two strangers wearing that strange emblem. The coordinates he'd etched into the journal's last page. The instructions written like a dying man's last resort. Everything pointed to a mission, unfinished, urgent, and far bigger than an inheritance ever could be. I slid the phone into my pocket, even though touching it made my skin crawl. If they could call it, they could track it. Or maybe they already had. But leaving it behind felt just as dangerous. Whatever was happening, the phone was part of it. A signal, a trigger, a test, something. I scanned the storage unit carefully. No cameras I could see. No footprints besides my own. Nothing disturbed. But that didn't mean I wasn't being monitored from a distance. Dad's journal mentioned surveillance methods I didn't even know existed. Ways to track people without their phones, without their cars, without anything physical at all. "We've been waiting for you," the voice had said. Not waiting for someone. Not waiting for the owner of the locker. Waiting for me. As if my involvement was inevitable. I stepped back, closed the locker, and locked it again with shaking hands. I didn't know why I bothered. The people who were watching me probably weren't stopped by locks. But some instinct, human or foolish, made me turn the key anyway, as though it could delay them for even a second. The metal door clanged shut with a final, echoing thud. The sound traveled through the unit like a warning drum. Then I stood there, staring at the number painted on the door, 47. A number I'd never forget now. A number that would follow me, haunt me, guide me. When I finally stepped out into the hallway, the entire storage facility felt different. The fluorescent lights buzzed in a way they hadn't earlier. The air tasted metallic, sharp. My footsteps felt too loud, as if they could alert someone lurking around the corner. Outside, the sky was turning a sickly shade of pink as the sun set behind the cracked pavement. The world looked normal. Cars passed. A dog barked in the distance. A teenager skateboarded across the parking lot. Completely ordinary. But I wasn't ordinary anymore. I wasn't someone who had just lost their father. I wasn't someone who had inherited nothing but a dusty briefcase. I stood in that dying light with the journal under my arm and the burner phone humming faintly in my pocket, and I felt the truth sink in like a stone. My father hadn't left me money. He hadn't left me land. He hadn't even left me a goodbye. He had left me a mission he didn't finish, a mission he died trying to complete. And now, whether I wanted it or not, it was mine.